Well, 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 who thought we would have had as a drama-packed, fueled, exciting Mexico Grand Prix? I definitely didn't. My expectations were all the way down here because generally it's always a bit of a boring race. Once you go past the first corner and any kind of safety car restart, it fizzes out very quickly. But wow, let's just say the drivers really took the last week and the discussion around the racing guidelines to heart, and they decided, well, if this is how we're going to go racing, let's go for it, because they most definitely did. And some people ended up on the right side of it and some people ended up on the wrong side, as we will discuss. So lo and behold, let's head into it. Let's answer your questions for what was a second race win in a row for Ferrari. The Constructors' Championship is definitely on that, with them overtaking Red Bull and getting into second. And the World Drivers' Championship is still mathematically up for grabs, but Lando is running out of time. But of course, plenty to discuss in this race, so let's head to your questions. So there's no other place to start than Max Verstappen and Lando Norris once again. God, I'm getting a bit of deja vu here, guys, because didn't we talk about this last week at Circuit of the Americas? Wow, I mean, Ferrari winning the race in great fashion with Carlos Sainz. A great weekend for him, and all the talk once again is about Max and Lando. And do you know what? It is great though. It's great that we've got some needle here, needle between friends out on circuit. And look, the penalties were rightfully dished out to Max Verstappen. However, there is a bit of a disagreement potentially on the level of those penalties that were dished out to Max, as a couple of you have asked. As Callum asked, do I think a 20-second penalty for Max was fair? For, of course, two separate incidents, but both rewarded him with 10-second time penalties. Or did he require a more severe penalty or a less severe penalty? Callum thinks it was really bad racing, but he thinks 20 is just enough, and hopes that the stewards are consistent moving forward. And talking of consistency with the stewards, well, that's kind of what you guys are asking and kind of a little bit worried about once again, because that's primarily what we want. iBloody asked, 5 seconds last week and 10 seconds this week. They're not consistent, or were they a different rule break for these two different incidents? And Anthony Ford also asks about the 10-second time penalties. He actually thinks maybe a 5-second would have been enough for the first one and a 10 for the second. He doesn't actually think he deserved two 10-second time penalties. Well, let's start with the first one, shall we? Because the first one in itself is basically roles reversed, or Lando learning, actually, not roles reversed. It's Lando learning from last week that he definitely needs to be ahead at the apex against Max Verstappen. And as they head down into turn 4, that's what Lando did. He got around the outside of Max and ensured he was ahead at the apex. And of Max, I don't think there's really anything kind of untoward here from Max, while I don't agree with the actual scenario in itself because the racing rules allow it. Is a different topic entirely. I've made my opinions clear on the racing rules as they currently are, and I don't like them. But Lando has done what he's allowed to do, and then Max also thinks he is ahead at the apex, which is why he runs Lando out of room. There's probably something in his head as well that thinks, I'm definitely not letting my championship rival get around the outside of me. Maybe even if I am late at the apex, I'm letting the stewards decide, as Max always tends to do. He maintains the position, and then he can maybe potentially build up an advantage that nullifies the penalty. And well, that is a very pertinent topic there around these whole penalties that have been dished out. So of course last week 5-second time penalties were issued for forcing another driver off the racing circuit, and then Lando Norris, well, he was given a 5-second time penalty, but it was reduced from 10 seconds because they understood that Lando was only forced off track by Max in the first place. Yet they still dished Lando a penalty. It was just a reduced penalty, but where they let themselves down last week is that they still didn't give Max a penalty either. So for forcing another driver off the track when essentially the roles had changed of him being the going from the defending car to the attacking car, and also not staying on track himself. But anyway, that's all in the past, and well, the drivers with making plenty of comments in the interviews throughout the course of the week, and then having a driver briefing as well, where they admitted that the rules need to change as they weren't happy. There was a bit of back and forth between Lando and Max apparently, and also George Russell has come out and given us a bit of tidbit on the inside of that briefing, stating that, well, the FIA are going to be revising these rules, and that 19 of the 20 drivers accepted or wanted these rules to be revised. Take a guess. I think we could all probably take a guess on who the one individual wasn't or didn't want these rules to be revised. The one that it primarily has benefited and the rules have accommodated in the first place. But that is a guess, and that is kind of allegedly. But going back to the actual 10-second time penalty in itself, was it sufficient? Well, there was a number of cases throughout the course of last season where the 5-second time penalty was dished out for forcing another driver off the racing circuit or gaining an advantage off the racing circuit, and the driver was able to just nullify that penalty and accept it and move on. And the drivers and the teams basically brought it up to the FIA saying, look, we're not happy with this. It needs to be a 10-second time penalty, at least for gaining an advantage off the racing circuit, because like you shouldn't be able to basically commit a professional foul and gain an advantage from it, which is what drivers were doing and teams were doing. And they agreed at the start of this season, that's fair. Anytime a driver forces another, anytime a driver gains an advantage off of the racing circuit, they'll be given a 10-second time penalty. Now, I cannot find anywhere that specifically states in regards to that being implemented on drivers forcing another off of the racing circuit, as we saw last week, which is maybe why we saw the 5-second time penalty still be adhered to and implemented for Oscar Piastri, George Russell, for forcing another driver off of the racing surface. So it was only Lando who would have got that 10-second time penalty for gaining advantage off of the racing surface. And that's what we saw here. So technically speaking, yes, consistency wise, Max probably should have got a 5-second time penalty there, and 10 probably was too much. However, you are still gaining an advantage by forcing another driver off the racing surface. It just so happens that at the exact corner where Max did that to Lando, Lando could rejoin in front of Max because of the way the circuit loops back round. But in any other kind of part of the circuit, Max would force a driver off the track and he could maintain that position, gaining an advantage, where of course we get to the next incident. So I think it should be a 10-second time penalty, but in regards to consistency and as the rules have been for the start of the year, 5-second is probably what should have been issued to him. But I don't think there was particularly too much wrong with what Max did. He probably just thought he was ahead at the apex because it was very tight. Turned out he was wrong. But where Max did very much go wrong, and where a red mist clearly descended over Max, was only a couple of corners later into the entry of the S's, turn 7 and turn 8. And for me, I don't think this penalty is harsh enough. Now, what is very intriguing here is that the penalty is actually for gaining an advantage while leaving the racing surface. But what Max actually did there was dangerous driving, outright dangerous driving. He had no intention of making the corner. He was just ensuring that kind of kamikaze type tactics. I am going to lunge myself into the apex to ensure that I am there first. I have no intention of making the corner, and if I make contact with my championship rival, the same attitude that he had with Lewis Hamilton a few years ago, then so be it, because I'm the one who's got the points advantage in the championship standings. We're running out of races in the remainder of this season, and it will benefit me if we both have DNFs. And it was just terrible driving, something that we don't want to see from any driver. absolutely any driver. And clearly, Max was miffed that Lando was able to rejoin the track after that last the couple of corners prior, and just wanted to regain that position, because there was no guarantee that he would get the position back from Lando, because who knows at that moment in time who was ahead at the apex. Lando knew, maybe Max did secretly know, that Lando could potentially be ahead at the apex, and it was just so dangerous, so dangerous. And for me, dangerous driving should warrant a harsher penalty. Now, what was very interesting for me is that I think there were discussions in the steward's office about the level of penalty that should be dished out to Max here, because the first incident at turn 4 was quite, once you saw an overhead shot, it was quite evident who was ahead at the apex. That was Lando. That was dished out quite quickly. And I think to most, Max's driving there into that corner wouldn't have taken long to even show the data or so forth, or whatever additional information they needed to make a decision that was dangerous driving. Everyone has eyes. We could all see the onboard. We could all see the TV coverage, and it was just, yeah, dangerous. And it's only because Lando moved out of the way that no contact was made. And I don't like this idea of just because contact isn't made, there isn't a penalty. You should still penalise the intent. If someone goes in two-footed in a football match, a soccer match, and they don't injure the player, they get the ball, they still get sent off for it, because there's intent there to hurt, and it's dangerous play. And that's the same with what Max did on Lando. And I think the stewards were deliberating whether or not to give him a harsher penalty, and because it was around 5 laps after that or maybe even longer, that they issued that second time penalty to Max Verstappen, and it was only for gaining an advantage off the racing surface. And the penalties that are available to the stewards, and what could they have issued to Max, well, is a potential drive-through. And that is actually a question from one of the comments here from David Johnson. Says, considering Max's only target is to make sure Norris does not win the race, should have Max been given a drive-through? And I do think he should have been given a drive-through, because the stewards have an arsenal of penalties that they can use to dish out for dangerous driving and professional fouls and breaching the regulations. First one is a 5-second time penalty, and the next one's 10 seconds. The next one after that is a drive-through penalty. The next one after that is a 10-second stop and go time penalty, a time penalty of the steward's discretion, a reprimand, a grid penalty, a disqualification, or a suspension from the next competition. And I do think a drive-through minimum should have been issued there, because what Max did there is that he ensured that he regained the position off track by dangerous driving as well, and it took them 5 laps to issue that penalty to Max. That's 5 laps that Lando had to stay behind Max until that decision was made. And Lando had to stay behind Max until he made that pit stop. So there was not at any point throughout the duration after that incident and the pit stop where Max had to give the position up that he had gained unfairly from Lando, and Lando lost a considerable amount of time in that race stuck behind Max Verstappen in the dirty air, and arguably cost him the race win. Because if you look at the gap at the end, the gap was around 4.5 seconds to Lando and Sainz. Charles Leclerc even said thanks to Max, actually, for him having a fight with Lando and making those moves, because it allowed him to get through, and it also ensured that Lando couldn't close the gap on Charles. He admitted McLaren arguably had the quickest. Well, they did have the quickest car today, and they would have caught him in that first stint. So that, for me, a drive-through penalty is an instant penalty that, for scenarios like that, removes the perpetrator from the scenario, and just gets them out of the way instantly. And I think that's why a drive-through would have been the perfect penalty, because I don't think 10 seconds is enough, and I don't think they have applied. I think they've given the wrong penalty there. But yes, technically he's gained an advantage off of the racing surface, but it's dangerous driving. They've got the telemetry. They could have seen the entry speed. We all have eyes as well and can see he had no intention of making that corner. He was just purely focused about hitting the apex first. And this has been the concern about the other from the other drivers of seeing this type of kamikaze style overtaking. And that's what Max did. Thankfully, he did get a penalty, but it should have been more severe, and we don't want to see that. And I think even Max fans don't want to see that style of driving, and it's indefensible. We don't. I just want to see wheel-to-wheel racing, clean wheel-to-wheel racing. Max and Lando have the ability and the skill between themselves and the pace to have fair battles. Hard but fair battles where they leave racing room, they go side by side, and we as fans get to see two brilliant F1 drivers at the top of their game fight it out for a World Drivers' Championship. At the moment, it's being decided, positions are being decided in the stewards. That's not how racing should be. They should not be decided in the steward's office. The stewards are there as a last resort and just to ensure that everything is fair. And at the moment, racing isn't fair. I just don't like it. I don't like these racing rules, and yeah, that's my view on it all. And look, you may disagree with me, but I think, look, technically that the gaining the advantage off of the racing surface is a 10-second time penalty now, and that's the correct application. But it should have been a harsher penalty purely because he had no intention of making that corner. He was purely focused on Lando, and if it wasn't for Lando's reactions of moving out of the way, he would have crashed straight into the side of him. And one day someone is going to do that and just not see Max, or they're just going to go, no, I'm leaving my car in there, and there's going to be a massive crash from it, and it will get us all talking again. And it's just not acceptable and not what we want to see from Max. I mean, he's better than that. He has the talent, he has the skill to race fairly. And we saw that with Charles Leclerc, and look how good of a battle that was in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia at the start of the 2022 season. I mean, that was brilliant to watch. But it seems to be that, yeah, I mean, when the championship is on the line, he'll literally do anything, absolutely anything, to ensure that he stays ahead. And this is not playing in the grey rules, or the grey area. This isn't playing with the rules. This is purely just dirty driving. I got asked last week, is Max a dirty driver? That is an element right there and a pure example of dirty driving. Simple as. So yeah, not a fan, and I think he's very fortunate that he only lost 10 points to Lando today, because I think Lando should have won that race, and I think Max should have had that drive-through. So we have a couple of questions still relating to Max. One from Addy here, who states, the penalty for Max is too much, but I think the FIA are just looking to quench the tears of the McLaren so both drivers can race for the remaining 4 races. And also, McLaren should be aware of Ferrari. They might lose both titles. We'll get on to McLaren and Ferrari and the Constructors' battle shortly. Esther also asked, other drivers crashed, yet there was no noise about that. Why is Max always getting the hate? Is it because he is so intimidating in a below standard car? So, firstly, I will answer Esther's end of her question there, which states in a below standard car. Yes, Max's Red Bull is not up to the standard that we have seen of Red Bull in the previous couple of seasons, where it was utterly dominant. It is still, while it has made improvements, it is still behind the McLaren and the Ferrari in performance. It can cope on qualifying over a single lap, but when it comes to the race day, it is left wanting a bit still. But at the moment, it is still enough for Max Verstappen to just not lose enough points to Lando, or at least still cause trouble for Lando and qualify ahead of him, so that Lando at least has to try and get round Max on track. And we've seen how that's happened, seen how that's worked out the last couple of races. And look, Max is a great driver, and we can see the difference between a great driver and an average driver who's especially short of confidence at the moment, and that is Sergio Perez, struggling, not even making it out of Q1, and struggling to basically make positions up and getting into unnecessary scraps and making contact with the junior team. But in relation to both Addy's comment about the FIA just looking to quench the tears of McLaren, so that there is a race for the remaining of the season. And why is Max always getting the hate? Well, I have to disagree with both of those comments there. I don't think the FIA are looking to quench the tears of McLaren and trying to ensure that there's a battle to the end of the season. Now, it is in their best interest, of course, from an entertainment and a business perspective, that there is a championship battle to the last race of the season. But if you look at both of those incidents, as we already mentioned, both of them are just slam dunk penalties. And it's a little more consistent than what we have seen in the past. That's for sure. And going to Max is always getting the hate. Well, I don't think he's always getting the hate. What F1 fans, why it may seem Max is getting the hate, is that people don't like his style of driving. As I mentioned previously, I especially want to see, as a racing fan and an F1 fan, see cars go side by side for multiple corners. I don't want to see battles end after a single corner. I don't want I don't want positions out on circuit to be resulted in the stewards. That's not what I want. I want it to be down to driver skill and the team's performance, and whether or not the pit crew can make a quicker pit stop than the others. That's what I want from F1, and we don't get that with Max. Max is very much of the attitude, I'm ending this in one corner. I get it from a self-preservation perspective, that as if he wants to win a championship, Max doesn't want to go wheel to wheel for multiple corners. He wants to ensure that, yeah, I'm coming out in front and I'm the one to win this race or win this position, and how dare you, it's my corner and that's it. And as I said, the FIA have allowed to get him, have accommodated that style of driving, which is why we're in the position we currently are in. But Max, people have just, it's quite evident to see that the application of the rules have not been fairly proportioned and applied to Max Verstappen, where it has been to other drivers. And there's plenty evidence of that. Just go back to 2021, plenty of times where he wasn't ahead at the apex and he just shoved Lewis Hamilton off. And of course, last week as well, most recently, where people thought that he should have received a penalty himself for not staying offset on track. So yeah, that's basically why people just want to see fair racing. And Max is a talent. I respect that he is an unbelievably quick driver, and he doesn't need to resort to this style of driving. Just doesn't. We've seen it with him and Charles Leclerc, where he came out on top against Charles Leclerc, and he gave fair racing room. How great was that at the start of 2022 with those two fighting it out? That was fair and respectful. That's what we want to see in F1, and that's why it may seem Max gets hate. And I get it. If you're a Max fan, of course you want to support your driver, and sometimes it is difficult to accept that the person that you support isn't faultless. And that's what you kind of have to step back and accept, is that they're only human. And drivers are going to make mistakes, teams are going to make mistakes, and it's okay. It's okay for them to make mistakes. No one's perfect. So, still staying with Max, but this time around it's in regards to his car, because Max had to take an old engine and put it into his car for this race weekend after having issues in FP1 and 2. And there was the concern, of course, and the grey cloud hanging over the Red Bull garage of whether that engine would last to the end of the Mexico Grand Prix. Mexico Grand Prix is always known to be very stressful on the engines. It's at the end of the season. There's a lot less air density because you're over 2,000 meters above sea level, and it puts a lot more stress on all of the mechanical parts, especially when it comes to cooling. So there was this worry that he would be down on power, understandably, because an older engine has covered more mileage, just like your road car. A car that's done 100,000 miles is more likely to break down than a car that's done 10,000 miles. That's just depending on the type and model of the car, of course. But if it's the same type, you get the gist. And yeah, there is, of course, Max got through that race without any issue. in regards to mechanical parts and the engine, but there is now reports coming out on the likes of Motorsport, Autosport, etc., reputable journalists reporting that it is looking like they are going to have to take another new engine. They're already outside of their current allocation, which will result in an additional penalty for them. And if it is just a standard power unit, my current understanding of it, I think, is 5 grid place penalty. It may result in a 10 place grid penalty. But if there's any other additional parts around that, which is outside of their allocation, it gets added. So it could result in something as severe as like what we saw with Liam Lawson, where they had to change everything. They were outside the allocation, and with all those penalties added up, it was a 60 place grid penalty. So there is a high possibility that, yes, Max could start towards the back of the grid come the race day on Sunday. So we will see. Of course, Interlagos is a track with a new power unit, even in that Red Bull that is not as quick as the Ferraris and McLarens at the moment. You would expect him to still get into the points at a circuit like Interlagos, where we have seen many of overtake before. Just go back to Lewis Hamilton with that new power unit on that sprint race weekend in 2021. That is what a new power unit can do for you, especially when everyone else is then still running used engines. So yeah, that's what it's looking like. Stay tuned, because yeah, that will really throw some interest into this championship battle, if that is the case. So moving on to McLaren now, and we have a question from Lotus Sprint 300R. Thank you, buddy. He says, mate, I don't agree with your assessment that McLaren have the fastest car at the moment. The last 2 Grand Prix, at least, show that Ferrari have the edge over the field. McLaren's window has evaporated. My driver of the day should take into consideration current form, not form from 2, 3, 4 GPs ago. What he's saying is he doesn't deny McLaren drivers due respect when their cars are obviously no longer the cars to beat, fastest. Food for thought, don't be lagging. So I disagree with your comments. I still think McLaren have the fastest car. I think there are driver reasons of why Ferrari have won the last 2 races. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Ferrari in the fact that they've made improvements with their car, and they've had 2 stellar drives in the form of Leclerc and Carlos Sainz these past 2 race weekends. However, if you look at where Lando Norris has been after the first lap in COTA, which was due to a driver error from him, and you look at Lando's poor qualifying, which was also driver error from him, and caused him to start in P3, and then he's come unstuck twice behind Max Verstappen. That is the reason why Lando Norris has not been able to win those 2 races. If you actually look at the data, and you look at the lap times, and you look at the pace of the McLarens, especially when they cleared those obstacles, or Lando cleared those obstacles, he had the pace to fight with those Ferraris, and I think COTA was probably would be a little bit closer, I think, but Mexico here, I think it's undeniable that Lando had the pace over the Ferraris. I mean, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz even stated as such in interviews afterwards yesterday, that if Lando didn't have those issues with Max, then they would have got past, or Lando would have got past a lot sooner, especially Charles Leclerc. He definitely admitted that. So it's not taking anything away from Ferrari, because they aren't doing a tremendous job at the moment, and I do think that the Constructors title is I mean, it's definitely up for grabs, 100% up for grabs, and I will be reiterating that Piastri at the moment is not a very good teammate. He is arguably the worst teammate out there at the moment, other than Sergio Perez, because he's not getting involved in either championships. He's not assisting his teammates in Lando Norris, putting his car in between him and Max to ensure Lando's getting more points, and he's not helping McLaren get this Constructors title and wrapping it up. If Piastri had a couple of decent results over the last few weekends, and was on the pace of what that McLaren should be and is capable of, then they would look considerably more comfortable than they are now. And Piastri really needs to pull his finger out of his bum when it comes to the last 4 race weekends. And in regards to your comment about driver of the day, I never take driver of the day. When it comes to driver of the day, I'm thinking about the race as there and then. I never look at previous races as an indication of why who should be driver of the day. I always go on the basis of the performance, and I gave it to Carlos Sainz yesterday because Carlos Sainz was tremendous all weekend. He lost that position at the start to Max Verstappen. It can happen. Like, pole position is not a prime position to be in at this circuit at the start, and he did tremendous to overtake Max Verstappen, a brilliant overtake down there, but caught Max napping. Yes, Max had a bit of an issue with his battery at the time. It was recharging, it was clipping, as was the indication of the red light. But I still don't think Max expected Sainz to go on the inside like that. And that was a great move. He controlled it under braking brilliantly, and then he managed to race great from there on out, and had his teammate comfortably covered off. So yeah, brilliant drive from him. That's I always give my fair dues, and I think McLaren still have the fastest car, and I think they should throughout the duration of this season. I mean, right now Lando should be less than 20 points behind Max Verstappen with 4 races remaining, and the constructors should arguably be wrapped up by now. Simple as. But I do give them credit where it's due. So it's a shame that Lando got caught behind Max. It's a shame he had a poor qualifying. He should have minimum have been on the front row, and he should have arguably won that race yesterday. And yes, it's due to him finding himself behind Max once again in qualifying, but Max ensured that, yeah, he basically ruined Lando's race yesterday, and that's why I do think, going back to it, a drive-through penalty to immediately get Max out of the front of Lando Norris, who they've already deemed as gaining an advantage there, would have been beneficial to Lando and would have been the right call. And staying with Ferrari, as I mentioned in regards to the constructors and how close it is now, well, Reja asked, does Ferrari have what it takes to win the Drivers' Championship or Constructors after a good couple of races? 100% yes. 100% yes. We're at the end of the season now, where I don't think we've got any big upgrade packages that are now coming from all the teams. I think we've seen those. I think we saw those in Kota. We may have still some small parts being added in the last 3 races, or the last triple header, when we have that week's break, so they're able to fly stuff out across the Atlantic to the Vegas race. But I think, yes, I think what we're seeing now is probably the performance gaps we're going to have for now to the end of the season. Ferrari are definitely looking like they are fighting toe-to-toe with McLaren. I still think, as just mentioned, by answering that question, I think McLaren do have the edge, but they're letting themselves down in regards to driver errors and just not putting that car where it should be at the start of races and in qualifying. But Ferrari are just converting, and you can't fault them for it. Lando caught Charles yesterday, and that was where that performance difference really showed an advantage of McLaren compared to the Ferrari. So that's where you have to look at that there. But yeah, they are, 33 points behind, just over 30 points behind McLaren now. They've overtaken Red Bull. That's a done deal, really, because Sergio Perez is non-existent and isn't going to help Max Verstappen and, Red Bull in general in scoring those points. And yeah, Ferrari look like they have got a car that can win every race to now and the end of the season. Minimum be on the podium and get double podiums up there. So yeah, it's massively on. And if McLaren don't win this Constructors, as Taco asks, if McLaren doesn't win the Constructors or the Drivers' Championship, is it the biggest bottle in Formula 1? So I don't think it's the biggest bottle in Formula 1 if they don't win the World Drivers. I think it's just a very big missed opportunity, because I don't think they've ever truly thought they could win the World Drivers' Championship. Hence kind of their decisions in regards to swapping Lando and Oscar early on in the season, and of course not imparting team orders when they should have done, and so forth. But the Constructors is a bottle job. It's not the biggest, because I think there's been others in the course of history where there's been bigger bottles, but it will be up there. Yes, it will be up there, because they've been arguably the most consistent team throughout the duration of this season in regards to performance, not necessarily results, but performance of their car. We know that throughout the duration of this season, every single race, McLaren have been fighting for race wins and podiums, haven't they? Now they haven't obviously converted those, but we know that throughout the duration of this season, McLaren have been up there for every single race. Now, who they've been fighting against is a different question. It's either been Red Bull, Mercedes, or Ferrari. But they should have had this Constructors title wrapped up comfortably. Absolutely comfortably. Oscar Piastri's letting the team down. Lando's had some poor performances. I mean, they lost points at Monza as well by letting the two drivers fight, and a poor strategy decision by pitting Piastri from the lead and gifted the win to Leclerc. Yes, Leclerc drove well, but they gifted that to Charles Leclerc, and they lost the win there. So yeah, they should be so far ahead right now, and it shouldn't even be a question of whether Ferrari could catch them. But here we are, and it's bloody brilliant. Well, how great this season has been, how up and down it's been, how it's chopped and changed. I mean, no one expected this at the start of the season, and it's so good. But we're heading into the last 4 races of the season with the Constructors still up for grabs, and the World Drivers' Championship. Of course, that's looking more in Max Verstappen's hands. He's definitely got one hand on the trophy, but it's still up for grabs. Both championships, anything can happen. Stranger things have happened in F1 in the last 4 races of the season. There's been engine blow-ups, there's been crashes, and well, we can see things are getting very, very tense now. I did find it not odd, but it's great to see, of course, the palliness between Ferrari and McLaren. Carlos Sainz photobombing McLaren, and Zach Brown photobombing Ferrari's team photo, and so forth. I did think, how long will that last? I mean, how long will that last if it gets a lot closer to the end of the season, or if McLaren and Ferrari are the ones fighting it out for both championships next year? I mean, things change very quickly in F1, and we've seen, of course, relationships turn sour. So it's good to see that kind of camaraderie across teams, but yeah, I did think that might not last long. So we've spoken about Max, the main Red Bull driver. We have to speak about Sergio Perez. Oh, Sergio. Checo. What a horrendous weekend it was for him. I mean, last year was bad enough, losing it and crashing out at turn 1. But this weekend, it was almost like it was just sad, wasn't it? It was just sad, not even making it out of Q1, and then getting into a tussle. I mean, the false start as well. I mean, he started outside of his pit box, so he is gaining an advantage there. Getting that 5-second time penalty. He did make a decent start, but then he came up against the driver who is vying for his seat. And yeah, I think Sergio just thought it was Max Verstappen and expected Lawson to just let him by. And Lawson went no. And the comments afterwards from Sergio are very bizarre. Basically, I mean, Liam Lawson has just absolutely humbled 2 veterans of F1 in 2 consecutive race weekends. Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez. He has got under their skin for just racing. He hasn't done anything untoward. And the comments from Sergio Perez saying he needs to basically kind of like know his place. He reiterated kind of Fernando Alonso's comments last week. He needs to respect people who are his elders, pretty much, in a roundabout way. Just go and have a look at those comments. It's very bizarre from Sergio Perez, and just shows that he's under pressure. And look, he was at his home race, things weren't going his way, and he kind of made a desperate move there, was never ahead at the apex. Where was Lawson supposed to go? Like, Lawson was like, well, no, I'm staying I'm staying here. I'm staying in it. And I also don't want to just run straight off the circuit. He could have done that. Lawson actually could have got Sergio Perez a penalty by driving off the circuit, and he would have got a 10-second because of forcing another driver off the racetrack or gaining an advantage if that's what Sergio Perez did, or if he gained that position. But yes, the question is by Showdown, who will replace Perez this year? And Phoenix Bogarden asks, does Perez finish the season with Red Bull Racing? So I think it's going to be Lawson. I think these two races in particular have definitely favoured Lawson to head into that Red Bull seat. I think Red Bull are quite impressed with how he's handled himself with Alonso last week, and of course a brilliant result of finishing in P9 after starting from the back of the grid. And then this week as well, it was another solid race for him. Yes, ended up finding himself outside of the points come the end of the race. Got himself into a tangle with Colapinto, which Colapinto was deemed to be at fault for. But I think they're impressed with what they've seen from Lawson. And I think after what Perez did this weekend and the last couple of races, I think he'll be replaced. Now, will he be? I think he'll be replaced by Lawson, which is great. I think Lawson's brilliant. And will he be replaced before the end of the season? I'm not convinced. No, I still think he'll be there to the end of the season, Perez. Now, Perez is adamant he's going to be there next year. Of course, he's saying he's got a contract. Carlos Slim even came out and said he's got a contract. So they're confident they can basically buy their way into that seat next year, as they have done halfway through this season. But allegedly, by the way, guys, but I think we kind of... I think he'll be there to the end of the season. I think he'll get a send-off, and how can you... I don't know how you can just warrant keeping Perez in that seat. Now, I think Red Bull are probably happy to finish third this season so that they can get additional wind tunnel time next year. The books, the accounts probably aren't looking too shabby, which is why they're not too fussed about the prize money that they'd lose from not winning the Constructors. And in P2, of course, they're heading into an important development year next year. Of course, it's 2025 and it's going to be the last year of these current regs, but you can start developing next year the aero and the car for 2026. So they want that wind tunnel time. They don't want to lose that. So I think they're quite happy for it and start afresh with a new young driver. So yeah, I think it's going to be a Lawson. I think Yuki deserves an opportunity, but I've mentioned it many a times before. They don't see him as a Red Bull driver. He is a Honda driver, always has been. He was brought into that seat arguably too soon as well. I think most people, that's why Yuki was quite crashy and so forth, and very rusty in his first year in F1, first couple of years in F1. He arguably should have had maybe another year in F2 to apply his trade. He was still young, yeah, I think that was purely down to the Honda connection and them wanting a Japanese driver in F1, especially in the Red Bull system with their engine. And unfortunately, that's how Red Bull still see him. So he's not going to get promoted, and I think Liam Lawson will, who they do truly see as a Red Bull driver. Moving on to the Mercedes, as TC asks, we saw how good Lewis was with race pace compared to Russell. Do I think Toto is happy with his driver lineup for next season? Do I think he'll continue to try to sign Max for 2026? Great question. I think Toto for now is happy. However, he will be keeping a watchful eye on George Russell's performance next year. That is for sure. I've said it before. George Russell he is under so much pressure next year, George. It's going to be interesting to see how he manages that, because Toto has already come out and openly said they were courting Max. It's come out and been reported, whether, I don't know if it's from a reputable source, I just kind of saw it online floating about, that Max has a performance clause in his contract that if he isn't in the top 3 of the driver standings at a significant part of the season next year, we don't know at what part of the season that is, it allows Max to get out of his Red Bull contract. No doubt there might, it wouldn't surprise me that there's some clauses in there that protect Max and allow him to get out of that contract if this car isn't performing and so forth anyway. So that doesn't really surprise me. And I do think that Toto will still court Max Verstappen for 2026. So George really has to prove himself. And George at the moment is... Of course, we know the struggles that Mercedes are going through. They're clearly not as fast as Max in that Red Bull and the McLaren and the Ferraris. And they admitted that this was a test session for them, this race. And thankfully, we got to see a fight between George and Lewis. But what we saw again is we saw George get past Lewis early on in the race. But then we saw the Achilles heel of George Russell, which is tyre management, again, because George just killed his tyres, absolutely killed his tyres. And we know from watching Lewis for many a year in F1 that that is arguably his strongest skill in F1 is the management of the tyres. He's won many a race by looking after his tyres, and that just showed as the gap just dramatically closed on George as he hit that cliff with those tyres. Now, George did very well to hold off of Lewis, and I think maybe some of that is due to Lewis getting in the dirty air of George. We know how difficult it is to overtake in these cars once you get into the dirty air. The cars can follow for a long time, but trying to get that extra grip out of the corners is proving to be more difficult as we are further and further into this current regulation set. And Lewis did eventually get George after George's tyres just kept getting worse and worse. And yeah, that's something that George dramatically needs to get on top of next year. Otherwise, he is going to just... I mean, I'm not saying he's going to become a sitting duck to Antonelli, because I'm not... It's very rare that a young driver comes in and gets on top of the tyres straight away. We've seen Colapinto do that, but in regards to someone like Antonelli, I mean, if he comes in and he's got like tremendous pace, as people keep stating he has, there's also the balancing act of managing the tyres as well. It's all well and good being fast, but you need to be able to make it to the end of the race. And George Russell may perform well with an extra bit of knowledge on looking after the tyres compared to Kimi Antonelli, but he needs to try and focus on finishing as high up the grid as possible to show, well, I'm worth keeping in this seat for 26 and not Max, because Max is very good at managing his tyres. Probably doesn't get enough credit, really, in regards to his tyre management. The best drivers in history of F1 have always been good at managing their tyres, and Max is very good at that. So you can be guaranteed pretty much that if Max came into that Mercedes, he would do a better job than George Russell, definitely at this moment in time, on managing his tyres. And that's why, yeah, we saw Lewis eventually get past Russell when it came to race pace. So interesting year ahead for Mercedes, and I'm intrigued to see how that partnership plays out with Antonelli and George Russell, and how that dynamic between George and Toto is as well, especially George, to see whether or not if he gets a bit more stress and how his demeanour is throughout the duration of 26, because that'll be a clear indication of how things are going behind the scenes. And lastly, we are touching on Haas, as Chaza asks, are Haas the 5th fastest team by far? Because at Austin, Nico was 8 seconds ahead of Liam Lawson, and in Mexico, K-Mag and Nico were way too fast for the midfield. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Because while they are 6th in the Constructors' Championship at the moment behind Aston Martin are not finishing anywhere in the points. Now, Lance Stroll finishing 11th, but that's been their best performance for quite some time. Alonso retired, and yeah, Austin, Circuit of the Americas was a terrible weekend for Aston Martin. And Haas, they look like they're going to get double points every weekend, at least minimum one car. So, yes, the short answer to that is they are the 5th fastest team. They're ended the season very strong, and might just fall a little bit too short of Aston Martin, but it will be close, and fair play to them. Fair play. And that is it for me for this week for the Mexico Grand Prix. Once again, pleasantly surprised by this race. Thankfully, it was drama filled, of course, with those drivers now implementing the racing rules as they are written. And yeah, basically forcing now the hands of the FIA to revise those regulations. I think the drivers want them to be updated now. But supposedly the racing rules are going to be left until the end of the season because, funnily enough, they want an element of consistency. Bit rich, really, isn't it? Bit rich coming from the FIA talking about consistency. But yes, you guys seem to enjoy the race as well as you voted. The majority of you voted for this race as a 7 or 8 out of 10. Some of you voted for 1 out of 4. I'm assuming those of you are few of you are Max fans, not too happy with the penalties that were dished out to him, and a few of you were less than impressed, and some of you were really impressed. But yeah, I think a 7 or 8 out of 10 is pretty good, especially considering every Mexico Grand Prix before this has been a pretty drab affair. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back, of course, for Interlagos, a sprint race weekend where, of course, more points on offer. Lando Norris definitely needs to capitalise. And not only that, Ferrari have more points on offer to capitalise on closing down that gap to McLaren in the Constructors. Both championships are still up for grabs with 4 race weekends remaining. Interlagos is one of my favourite weekends of the year because it always provides great racing, that circuit. And, well, with how the previous races have gone, no doubt we're in for some more drama and some great racing again. So I'm sure I'll see you for the F1 watch along. Turn your notifications on, hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye.